Want to surprise your opponents with an aggressive and unpredictable opening? Meet the Grob opening. G4. A bold and risky move that can catch even experienced players off guard. Let's dive into its tricks and traps. Black typically responds with d5, immediately targeting the g4 pawn. Instead of defending it, you continue playing as if you're making careless moves by playing bishop to g2, seemingly giving up the pawn for free. However, your deeper strategic idea is to treat the bishop on g2 like a tall pawn, lulling your opponent into a false sense of security. As you later play c4, attacking black's d5 pawn, they might assume you're just recklessly sacrificing more material and eagerly capture the c4 pawn. At that moment, your light-squared bishop on g2 suddenly springs to life, capturing the b7 pawn, attacking the rook on a8, and setting up a winning position. This kind of tactical trickery is common in the Grob opening. After knight to d7, capturing the rook on a8 is a viable option. However, black does get some compensation since white's kingside structure is slightly compromised. Instead of taking the rook immediately, I prefer playing pawn to h3, keeping black's knight on g4 and bishop on g2 under pressure and maintaining a strong attacking stance. At this point, your opponent will often think, I can play rook to b8 and counter the bishop. They believe they found a clever way to escape the problem. However, in reality, after the bishop trade, white gains several key advantages. First, your pawn on g4 is still alive, meaning black could not eliminate the Grob pawn. Second, this trade opens up the g-file for your rook, giving you more attacking chances. Additionally, the g4 pawn remains an annoyance. Whenever black tries to develop their knight, you can play pawn to g5, kicking it away and maintaining control. From here, white actually has a solid position, which is quite surprising in the Grob opening. You continue with knight to a3, aiming to regain material. Once you recover the lost pawn, you might even gain a positional advantage, an unusual but powerful outcome for the Grob. In fact, there was a really cool game where black played knight to a5, leading to an interesting battle. Trying to defend this pawn doesn't really matter because I captured it anyway. We're playing disrespectful chess, completely ignoring our opponent's threats. However, the reality is that if black accepts the knight sacrifice, I would continue with queen to a4, delivering a double attack. Let me show you how it plays out. This double attack allows white to win back the sacrifice piece and even gain an extra pawn along the way. But in the actual game, black found a counterstrike with queen to d5, which at first glance looks like they are taking over the position. At this point, white simply gave up the rook, allowing queen takes h1. It looks like black is completely winning. They have captured the rook, are attacking the knight, and seem to have full control. However, white strikes back with queen to a4, launching a sudden counterattack that shifts the momentum of the game. Now the king cannot move, as that would lead to queen to d7 checkmate. The knight on f6 supports this attack, making it even more dangerous. In response, black played pawn to c6, trying to create some breathing room. At this point, notice that black's queen on h1 is doing a great job guarding the g2 pawn, preventing white from capturing it immediately. So white played a bold move, pawn to a4, blocking the long diagonal. However, this allows black to capture the knight on g1, putting the white king in check. The king has to move, and now black is up a rook, seemingly having completely destroyed white's position. But here's the problem. Black still has to deal with white's threat, and it turns out that their king has no proper defenders. The queen on h1 is deep in white's position and cannot easily return to help. In the game, black struggled to find a good move and played pawn to f6, but this failed to queen to c6 check, followed by the brilliant knight to f7 checkmate. This game was truly spectacular, but of course, it's not something you'll see very often. Now, let me show you what usually happens when you play the Grob opening. Black plays pawn to d5, immediately challenging white's setup. You continue with your usual bishop to g2, offering a gambit with the g4 pawn, and then follow up with pawn to c4. At this point, we already know that white's main goal is to open up the long diagonal for the light-squared bishop on g2. If black tries to defend the d5 pawn, for example, with pawn to e6, white usually continues with queen to b3, one of the main attacking ideas in the Grob opening. From here, the queen and bishop work together, increasing pressure on the d5 pawn, making it difficult for black to hold their position. But the queen on b3 not only attacks the d5 pawn, it also targets the b7 pawn, creating strong pressure together with the bishop on g2. This setup is quite uncomfortable for black, and in most cases they struggle to find a good response. A common mistake is playing pawn to b6, trying to protect the b7 pawn. However, this turns out to be a serious problem. After an exchange in the center, the long diagonal opens up, putting black in immediate trouble. For example, after pawn takes d5 and bishop takes d5, white attacks the rook on a8. If black tries to defend it, they often overlook another deadly threat, the queen and bishop battery along the diagonal. This leads to a devastating attack, where white can continue with moves like queen to b4 or even queen to f7, leading to an overwhelming position for white in just a few moves. Another popular variation occurs when black tries to defend with queen to ce8, attempting to hold the position, but even here, white has strong attacking plans that keep black under constant pressure. But of course, this idea fails in the same way. After the trade, bishop takes d5, attacking both the f7 pawn and the b7 pawn at the same time. Black might try to defend, thinking, if I offer an exchange, maybe I can survive this. But then white simply plays queen takes b7, going after the rook on a8, and black still ends up in trouble. Sometimes black plays bishop to d5, believing they've stabilized the position. However, they completely overlook white's real intention. You're not interested in capturing the bishop. Instead, you play the winning move, securing victory instantly. There's also a hilarious variation here. The best move for black in this position is actually pawn to c6, trying to block the long diagonal and prevent the bishop on g2 from causing further damage. But then, white calmly plays pawn to h3, keeping up the pressure and maintaining complete control over the game. In this position, white plays the surprising move pawn to h3. This unexpected move often catches opponents off guard, as they anticipate a direct response to their threats. Instead, white opts for a counterintuitive strategy. The idea behind h3 is to lure black's bishop away from the c8-h3 diagonal, thereby removing its defense of the e6 pawn. If black responds with bishop to f5, white continues with knight to c3, deliberately leaving the d5 pawn undefended. Should black capture the pawn with knight takes d5, white is prepared to sacrifice the knight to reach a favorable position where the bishop exerts pressure on both the f7 and b7 pawns. In an actual game scenario, black might avoid capturing the knight and instead play bishop to b6, pinning the knight and planning to capture it subsequently. White can counter this by playing queen to a4, creating a counterpin and turning the tables on black. Here, black plays pawn to br5, trying to kick the bishop away. At first glance, it looks like white is in serious trouble, as both the knight and bishop are under attack, and it seems impossible to save them both. However, white finds a brilliant resource, queen to c2. This move creates a pin along the c-file, which keeps white in the game. After the trade on c8, white exchanges pieces, leading to a spectacular position. Now, something interesting happens. After just 11 moves, black somehow recreates their starting position. But with one major problem, white's tall pawn wins the game. Remember, the bishop on g2 has been lying in ambush, disguised as a mere pawn, but now it strikes with bishop takes d5, attacking the rook on a8. Black has no way to save the rook, and white gains a decisive material advantage. Now, I know some people might say, this would never happen in my games. My opponents won't play like this. But the point isn't to memorize every single move. Chess isn't about blindly repeating moves like a machine. Instead, the main idea of the Grob opening is understanding the powerful bishop on g2. In many lines, this bishop suddenly strikes down the long diagonal, and when combined with the queen, it creates tremendous pressure on key squares. That's the real takeaway from this opening. I hope you understand all variation. If you think this video is helpful for you, then like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.